Hi, today we're going to talk about risk and what to do about it. Now, the most important risk of all is spending your life not doing what you want and betting that you'll be able to buy yourself the freedom to do it later. Now, you want to grow your business into something that sustains you and the people that depend on you for your whole lives, right? Well, if you want to do that, welcome to the world of risk. Now, my view on risk is really simple. I take a lot of chances because I never know just how perfect something might work out in the end. And sometimes my calculated risks fail because maybe I don't kind of anticipate the things that could go wrong, but I'm an incurable optimist, and so that just happens to be me. However, in the business world, I'm a slightly different person. Every decision that you make in the business world has some kind of risk attached. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called risk taking, it'd be called sure thing taking, okay? Now, the key to being successful in the long run is taking calculated risks that minimize the negatives and maximize the positive outcomes. And that's a skill, but the really good news about that is because it's a skill, it means that you can learn it. Now, everyone was born with the same amount of luck. It's what you do with it that counts. And you know what they say about luck? It's that point where preparation and opportunity go to bed together and snuggle up. Preparation and opportunity, what we commonly called taking calculated risks when that happens, okay? Preparation and opportunity. Now, have you mastered taking calculated risks or are you still working on it? If you are still working on it, then let's start talking about the differences between foolish risks and calculated risks. And I know quite a lot about the foolish ones, so I'm a bit of an expert on that. Anyway, not all risks are created equal. There are big differences between foolish risks and calculated risks, and the key is to learn how to pick one from the other. A foolish risk is a risk that's taken without doing any due diligence or thinking about the possible negative consequences, like walking across a crowded highway with your eyes closed. You might get to the other side, which is a positive return on the risk that you took, but you're going into a situation blindly and you don't know what's actually going to be waiting on the other end, even if you get to the other end. You're essentially just rolling the dice, and the chances of a positive outcome are pretty slim. But, and I mean this, you'd be amazed how many business people use this approach to risk-taking, though, fueled by hope and desperation, an inflated sense of their ability, overconfidence. They start up businesses doing things that nobody wants because they didn't go out and check in the first place. But you're not one of those lunatics who make those kind of risky decisions, are you? Repeat after me. Oh no, Steve, I'm not one of those lunatics, am I? Am I? On the other hand, a calculated risk involves a fair amount of research. You know, the essential skill for 2019 that we mentioned in a video a couple of days ago comes back in right here. The results won't always be positive, but you've done enough legwork to know that the chances of success are higher than the chances of failure. And you're going to have a backup plan because that's just the obvious thing to do. Now, ultimately, this conundrum over foolish versus calculated risks actually leads a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners to become very risk averse. You've heard of risk averse, right? That's when we'd rather stay anxious in case something bad is going to happen rather than go out and actually find out whether something good can happen instead. So we start to weigh the pros and the cons of any action, and the pessimist inside of us screams louder than the optimist. Oh, that's going to work. So generally speaking, what happens as people is we shy away from risk taking, and we do it for a few good reasons. The first one is we have an unrealistic assessment of failure. In other words, the risk of doing something and it not working out is often much, much lower than we estimate. But by nature, most of us are pessimists and we give risks an unrealistic likelihood of failure. Okay, do we understand that? Next one, exaggerated consequences. Even if we set the odds correctly, we often exaggerate the downside, the negative consequences. We come up with unrealistic worst-case scenarios and assume that the risk will end up going down that route. And because that is just too terrible to contemplate, we don't take the risk in the first place. But actually, we've over-exaggerated the bad stuff. It isn't going to happen like that. And then the third one is the inability to handle the consequences. We also underestimate our own personal ability to handle the consequences of a risk that maybe didn't go out quite the way that we wanted to. Look, something bad could happen, but in most cases, it's something that you're going to be able to handle. It ain't going to be life-threatening, and if it's a skill, like I said earlier, you're going to be able to learn it. Now, do any of these sound familiar to you? While you might have other names for them, there is nothing more than excuses, okay? That's really what they are. If you learn how to assess and then take calculated risks while pushing the foolish risks aside, you shouldn't have any problem taking chances. So, here's 6 tips for taking calculated risks. While obviously foolish risks are often easy to spot, it's the disguised risks that can play tricks on you. Well, it sounded good to me when he explained it to me, and I mean, you know, 7 figures in 30 days, and he had all these funnels and charts and graphs, and the returns are absolutely amazing. In order to increase your chances of only taking calculated risks with the potential for high returns, and you need to keep these tips in mind. The first one, do lots of research, do your due diligence. In order to take a calculated risk, you've got to understand every little detail of that decision that you can. That gives you time to discover red flags and potential issues. In order to understand the importance of research, let's look at an example. Think of yourself like an investor. While some might consider successful investors lucky, they're actually very, very smart. They conduct lots of research and they never base a decision on emotions or on one piece of evidence. They understand the importance of leveraging the resources that they have around them, like investment brokers, to increase their chances of success. So let's say an investor is looking to buy some shares. They would never just look at the prices on the internet and place an order, or just talk to one broker. They review stock picks from everywhere that they can find. They'll talk to lots of brokers. They'll analyze the trends, and then they'll make a decision. Now, as an entrepreneur, you need to be doing the same. Anytime you have a decision to make, you should talk to a trusted advisor or a couple of people if possible, and you should explain what you want to do. Then objectively analyze the numbers, consider the ways it could fail and what you can do about that to minimize the risk. And only then can you ensure that a risk is a calculated one. Now, the second thing to do is to anticipate mistakes. A smart risk taker can anticipate potential mistakes and account for them. So before you take any decision, you should think about every possible outcome and then consider the positive ones. Make sure you've got those in mind, but really, really focus on the negative ones, okay? They're the ones that can turn around and bite you in the bum. If the deal lost money, for example, how would your business respond? If a partnership is broken, what course of action would you take? If the project falls behind, how are you going to catch up and meet the deadline? You need to ask questions like these before you actually get started, and then you've informed yourself and the people around you about what you might do if one of those things happen, okay? Now, just along the same line of thinking, just recognize that if you get too many potential mistakes coming up, that probably indicates that this is risky, like the risk level is too high. And if you have to keep going through and looking for solutions and moving further and further away from the thing that you want to actually achieve, I wouldn't do it. Honestly, I'd drop it. There'll be other much better opportunities coming along. Now, the next thing that you want to do, number 3, is to set checkpoints and goals, because here's where you start, here's where you end up. I'll tell you a little story about Apollo 11. Apollo 11 was on course 1% of the time. The rest of the time, it was up a little bit, over to the left, boys, drop down the nose, okay, they were adjusting the course 99% of the time between Earth and the Moon. And for you, that's the kind of thing you need to be thinking about. You need to be right on top of step by step. You need to know where you should be and where you are the whole time. Okay, so while you often hear people discuss the importance of goal setting and talking about the result, most of the conversation you need to have with yourself is not so much around the significance of the long-term or end goals. It's actually about the things that you need to do in order to get there, to make sure that this week you got to the point that you need to get to. And the following week, you're at that point. And the following week, you're at that point. Setting checkpoints and goals is extremely important. You don't hear a lot of discussion about short-term goals and checkpoints. And while the end goal is obviously really important, you need to make sure that the checkpoints that you set in place are there, because they're the ones that keep you on track. Okay, number 4, be willing and ready to pivot. It doesn't matter how calculated the risk is, you must be able to handle what happens if it goes wrong. A business decision rarely, if ever, goes exactly as it's planned. Sometimes the outcome will be better than anticipated, and sometimes it'll be worse. And while you can't always control the result, you can certainly control how you respond. So overall, you should be ready and willing to pivot at a moment's notice. For example, let's say you embark on a project knowing that you've got a $50,000 budget. Then 3 months into the 6-month-long project, your budget gets slashed to $25,000. If you sit there and slam your head against the desk like this, you're probably going to fail. However, if you're willing to pivot, you'll head back to the drawing board and you'll figure it out. Now, while you often hear about entrepreneurs who took on serious risks, beat the odds and found success, you don't always hear about what was happening behind the scenes. Now, in most of those situations, there were things that went wrong. However, the decision makers were willing and ready to pivot in order to find success. Number 5, learn to love the word no. Saying yes to too many things is overwhelming and counterproductive. And if you say yes to all of those things, you might be saying no to some that will really work out. Because if your plate is too full, there's no room for the unexpected or the ideal opportunity. The last one is jump when the water feels good. Have you ever met an entrepreneur who's really good at doing some due diligence, but then actually never pulls the trigger on an opportunity? Perhaps that entrepreneur is you. You know, and while you're not alone, you do have to overcome at some point your fear of action before inaction sets in and two things happen. You get frozen in place and that opportunity just drifts by. Now, if you've done your due diligence and the water feels good and you feel in your bones that this is a good idea, jump in. There is a time when you actually have to make that decision. Is it scary? Yeah. Are there unknowns? Of course there are. But trust your instincts and rely on your research. If you don't jump now, you may never jump in the future. And the worst thing to have later in life is regrets. You cannot do anything about them. At 65, I can tell you that for sure. The only thing that makes life easier for me is I can't remember the things that I should be regretting. Okay, so make sure you say yes to calculated risks, because those are the ones that are going to create the wonderful future that you want to put in place for yourself and for the people that you care about. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. It'll help support the channel. And if there's anything that you'd like me to be talking about, then drop them in the comments below. And don't forget to hit the bell icon and be part of the notification squad to get notified every time we upload, because I respond to questions in the first hour. And I'll see you in the next video, and I'll catch you later.